In 1982 or 3, my wife and I decided that we wanted to get out of Manhattan, and we drew a 100-mile radius around the city because we still wanted to be close for cultural reasons and because we have a lot of family in the area. And we were looking for studio space for me and a job for her, and those two things coalesced in Red Hook, New York. I have a studio practice, which is the vast majority of my time, and I'm working on a very large project called Biography, which has been going on for 4 years now. The second installment of that will be shown in New York in December. But in addition to that work, I have what I call cited work which is generally made on a specific site that relates to a specific site, and it can be at a museum or a university, it can be in this country, it can be in Europe, or wherever, and I'm currently preparing to install a very large permanent piece in Australia, actually 2 pieces, and I will be heading out there in a couple of weeks. I would say that the one thing that they all have in common is a very simple phrase I use. It's large accumulations of small things. And that has its roots in geology and in evolutionary biology and in the natural sciences. Large accumulations of small things, especially for poor artists, tends to be stuff that's free. And many years ago I started working with newspaper. This is 23, 24 years ago at least. And I became known for these large newspaper things that I made. But I've also worked with large quantities of aluminum cans or shredded rubber. One of the pieces in Australia is shredded rubber. And they tend to be large quantities of either pre or post consumer industrial materials. And there are many reasons why I use those materials, but in all honesty, the fact that A, they were appealing to me, but just as importantly, they were free early on, is very important. And I also am very committed to working with humble materials. I don't have any real interest in designing something and having it cast in bronze. It's just not my aesthetic. So the humble materials are the ones that appeal to me. My studio would be a cabinet shop for 6 weeks, and then it would be a studio for 2 months, and then I'd take on more jobs for money, and then I go back to art. And eventually I started making enough income from my work that I didn't have to do that anymore. But because I was surrounded with woodworking materials all the time, and formica and cheap plywood and all that, that all started to integrate itself into the sculpture I was making. My process is based very strongly in evolution. Everything is evolution. Evolution is different than design in that there's no perceived outcome in evolution. Nobody knows where it's going to go. That's why it's called evolution. Design is something where a person or an entity or an organization, or if you're a believer, a god, says, here's the objective, how do we get there? Evolution is just the opposite. Evolution is a large accumulation of small things coming together and ending up somewhere unforeseen that nobody can ever understand. We don't know where it's going. The most important thing for me, I'm very old-fashioned. If you don't have a visual response to it, if it doesn't grab you in some way, nothing I can say is going to get you there. In other words, the primary response is a sensory one. There's a lot of intellectual stuff going on. But if I give that to you without you having already had a more primal response to it, then I am essentially compromising the whole experience. The sign of great art is that it's accessible on a number of levels. That a person with no art education can walk by it and go, wow, look at that. And on the other extreme, the connoisseur can go walk by it and go, wow, look at that, and then add in, context and add in comparisons to other art and add in art history and all of this, and have a much more complex set of responses to it. But the real key is that great art is accessible to everyone.